Hey, welcome to the Art Condition Podcast, a weekly show that will discuss the business, community, and often undiscussed stress and mental health concerns of being a professional artist or even a serious hobbyist. I'm Joby. I've been in the tattoo and illustration professions for 25 years. My co-host is Moose, a data analyst, social media manager, and art agent. If you enjoy the content, please consider visiting the Patreon page in the show notes to help support the effort. Or if that's not an option, please like, subscribe, leave a good review, or just share with your friends. And definitely go visit the links of our guests on this episode. Thanks for listening and have a great day. How are you guys doing today?
Doing all right.
JB,
within acceptable boundaries.
Yeah, JB, I know that you're feeling under the weather, so I really appreciate you total
Surviving
brain
and
fog.
making it out here.
Yeah, surviving, making the effort, rallying.
Yeah.
Rallying is
Rallying.
is the term that I was looking for.
Yeah. I'm happy to be here. If something that I can say in my incessant rambling helps someone down the road, it's worth it.
We should all be so lucky.
Yeah, there's always something in rambling, incessant rambling, that's going to be valuable. It's not podcats, it's podcast. So yeah, thank you guys again. Let's start just with like some preliminary stuff. Moose might get dropped every now and then. Pay it no mind. He loves to disappear on us. I want to jump right into some quick introductions. Maybe Andreas, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're involved in, and what brings you with us, or what brings you to us today.
Sure. I'm Andreas Walters. I am by day a business analyst for a financial company, and by night/hobby, I am a tabletop games developer and producer, and I manage the production and development and the design of tabletop games and related products. I've launched 14 Kickstarter projects and a number of popular brand lines, as well as currently making the Hyperlight Drifter tabletop RPG.
Very cool. 15 Kickstarters.
I think
I
might
want
be more than that.
Wow. I want to bask in the glory of that, but we will definitely come back to that. I just want to make a note that's an impressive accomplishment. Most people find one Kickstarter to be daunting. You've done possibly more. You've lost count of how many Kickstarters you've done. So let's just bow before the majesty of that one. And I'm not.
And then I get an email from someone. I'm like, okay, what project did he back? I got to go look him up. And
we raised $5. Yes, successfully funded. JB, can you catch us up a little bit on where you're coming from? Who are you?
Hello, I am JB. Most people know me as Drop the Die on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all those good places. I am a full-time D&D 5e and tabletop RPG content creator. Most of my income and my work comes from Patreon and previous self-publications on DM's Guild and things like that. But as for 2020 as a whole, I've actually not done any of my own projects and have focused exclusively on working with other people on their projects and Kickstarters, their publications that are coming on later in the year or next year due to the virus and the insanity that's caused. There's a lot of setbacks currently. But hopefully 2021 will be back to making my own products and making my own designs and putting them out in the world, including Kickstarter stuff and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this podcast is in general art centric. It's sort of like geared towards artists, working artists, the serious hobbyists. But you guys are, I think, important to talk to because there's a lot of overlap in what you guys do with a whole host of other things, artwork, not the least of which artwork being important to what it is that you guys do. But a lot of the marketing and the wisdom that you guys are going to bring to the table is what we're really interested in. And and just in the especially the art world that we exist in, Moose and I, the overlap with D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, tabletop games is pretty vast. So, that's sort of like what brings us to you guys. And
I want to jump in here real quick.
Yeah.
We also did invite Emily Harmon onto the show, and she was not able to make it due to prior engagements at a convention. So we asked her some of these questions in advance, and we will interject her points to keep her involved in the conversation. And we do really appreciate her input as well.
Yeah, thank you for noting that. And all of the guest information will be in show notes that will be attached to all of the places that this will show up. So please go check that out when it comes up in front of you. JB, this area of expertise that you have, you mentioned some work with tabletop gaming outside of D&D. It's largely been D&D, right? But you've done work outside of that as well.
It has been largely D&D, but I've done playtesting and playtest feedback for Helheim Unbound RPG last year, I believe, or maybe the year before. It's all kind of blending together in the 2020 miasma.
Yeah.
But I'm also working with Absolute Tabletop for Mecha Hack. That's coming pretty soon. Their second expansion for that system. And some other stuff, NDA.
Sure.
In the nearby sphere that I've been working on as well.
It's just a bit of a tangent here, just real quickly, because you're on your website. I think what focuses most prominently on your website is the reviews that you've done for other products, and you sort of downplay a little bit. Maybe downplay isn't the right word because I'm not putting intention in your mind, but it seems downplayed a little bit, the amount of work that you have done for creating content for tabletop games, and you were saying that the majority of your income comes from that, like all of the stuff that you've created in the past and the sort of the ongoing sales that results from that.
Yeah, as to date, and I'm kind of juxtaposing and putting this number together on the fly here. I think for product reviews and for my website, I've made about $6 in 8 years. So that is not a source of income for me. That's just hobby stuff. And I do it because I'm in an advantageous position to get these products from these companies, know them personally and through reputation, and be able to show everyone who follows my other work, this is what you're going to get with this product. This is what you can expect. No frills. I'm not being paid. I haven't made any money. So, I don't have any reason to lie about it.
Sure. That's a good distinction to make.
The huge majority of my income comes from D&D 5e stuff that I've published. Yeah. Specifically DM's Guild.
And you were saying that up until this year, it's been all content that you've created as personal projects, and now this whole year you've just been working with other people. Was there a particular reason for that to happen? Like what inspired you to just start working with other people and not do your own stuff this year?
Yeah, in 2019 I got asked to be a part of, I think, 3 projects towards the later part of the year, Q3 and Q4 of 2019, and I did not have the time. I was releasing other publications like my platinum bestseller, Taverns, Inns, and or actually Mithril at this point. It sold like 5,000 copies, and it took me 6 months to make that thing. And I'm like, I am not doing anything else until I finish this and I publish it, and then we can talk. And when I published it and it was a hit, there was a whirlwind that I got swept up in where I just had too much work on my plate that I couldn't be a part of these other projects that seemed really exciting. So coming into 2020, I told myself that I wanted to do exclusively other stuff. All these invitations that I had been getting, I wanted to just keep saying yes.
Okay.
Yes to work with new people, yes to new projects, things outside of my comfort zone. I just wanted to keep saying yes to everybody in 2020. And then in 2021, do a mix of both. See which one works out better for me, which one's better for my mental health and financial stability, all these other little factors that I wanted to take into account, I wouldn't be able to know for sure until I could contrast them.
Yeah.
So 2020 and 2021 are going to be my 2 years of contrast to see how I want to operate moving forward.
Got it. Cool. Andreas, before I bounce back to you, I want to pause, take a tangent from a tangent, and
so we're back to normal now, right?
Yeah, right. Pretend that we're talking for a minute and either of you can jump in on this, or both of you, that we're talking to people who don't know what perhaps I think everybody's familiar with a tabletop game. I can't imagine somebody that doesn't in Western civilization that doesn't know what that is. And then but then, like, what is D&D? What makes D&D particularly unique amongst tabletop games? And yeah, what is it that people are doing when they're playing D&D? This is just for the sake of the total newcomer of like, why should I care? Andreas, you want to take us through that a little bit?
So the why do I care, or like, why do people care about D&D, or why it exists as a market? I think the main reason behind that is that it is a major fantasy genre, in a sense, that has pulled a lot of imagination from the younger 90s generation that have grown up into it, and our parents have grown up, and there's sort of been a couple generations of Dungeons and Dragons that a subculture has evolved into. And as a game, it has slowly evolved into a more and more social space. And to this point where geek culture is now popular culture, Dungeons and Dragons has fallen with that into the limelight of, this is actually a cool game a lot of cool people play, because they are also nerds, like, Stephen Colbert, great personality. You have Vin Diesel. There are so many different, you have Critical Role now, as a great example of, you have so many large personalities, and they all lose themselves in this world, and there's something compelling to it. And the compelling thing about D&D is it's a generic fantasy universe where you can put anything you want into it. And D&D happens to be the biggest one on the table and the biggest one in the marketplace. And that dominance has carried itself through the years. So whether it was something else, like whether Elder Scrolls made a tabletop role-playing game in the 90s or 80s, like, it could have been a different story, but that's, Daggerfall tabletop role-playing game isn't on every table. So
yeah, it's interesting that shift, how mainstream it's I mean, not to
Avengers movies, Iron Man,
comic books, D&D, like
comic books.
These have all become pop culture icons. And
True Blood. You start getting that crossover.
Another tangent. What do you think was that shift? Like, what brought us to this point where, like, now D&D is cool? I used to get beat up for playing D&D.
Geeks became millionaires.
Oh,
yeah.
The money.
Geeks had money, and they spent it on stuff they liked.
If you really stop and think about it, like, I can remember when things started to change around, and I started to see a lot of media that I enjoyed all of a sudden, was right around the time when, like, computers were blowing up, and older people had no idea how to fix them. And then younger people, nerds in particular, who had been taking them apart and putting them together, they started making a little bit of money. And then they started making their own little side projects, their side hustles and side businesses. And then they were involved in making movies, making CGI for movies. And it just kind of kept evolving in that way. And Lord of the Rings happened. And it's this
Lord of the Rings is a great example. That is probably a flagstone.
It is a gargantuan cultural touchstone that anchors D&D to every single person that has grown up in the last 25 years.
Right.
That's an interesting Harry point. Potter, which will be interesting to see. That was the last generation. Like, we sort of had, Lord of the Rings, the books, Lord of the Rings, the movies, Harry Potter books, Harry Potter movies. What do we have now, though? That's the interesting thing, to see where generic fantasy goes, or target setting fantasy.
It's a really good question, because I mean, I don't know if there are any like modern classics of that type of caliber. Like at this point, I don't know. Nothing is. Like I can think of like Sanderson and some others that are like making.
I was
like
about to say Brandon Sanderson deserves to be on that list. Joe Abercrombie. I'll never be able to pronounce his name and give it actual justice. The whole Witcher series, we can already see ripples of that coming out.
Witcher is definitely a good one.
No, that's true.
We have the Witcher show, Witcher games. We also have Witcher movies planned, and a tabletop game that's very robust. And I think it's going to be making splashes in the next year or so.
Well, what a great time to be alive, and what a great time to be running 15 Kickstarters. Andreas, what in the F, man? Like, what's this? So I don't.
Why?
Well, yeah, kind of. I mean, I don't want to like, make you relive any like bad memories or anything, but like, did they all get funded? Like, have like all the Kickstarters you've done, or like how many? What percentage?
One.
Wow. Okay, so just about everyone that I know who's even.
And then I relaunched and that one funded. But the only reason I canceled it was because I felt like my scope was too close near to its related IP.
Okay.
So that was more of maybe I should retweak this. And so like 3 days in, I canceled it, or 4 days in.
Yeah. So everybody that I know that's even thought about starting a Kickstarter has been really intimidated. Just like how much work goes into it. Have you done all of those by yourself, or like have you worked with other people in developing those? Or
pretty much all of them are done by myself. I am pretty much a one-man team not to say that I'm doing everything, like in terms of marketing, developing, writing, like I am the project manager of everything. So if I need art, I need writing or specific writing, I need to get people to make those. I can do layout to a degree, or graphic design to a certain extent, but my skills I know are limited in that implementation. So like if I need something, I need to get other people on board to help with that.
Yeah.
So a lot of the projects I do are very specific. I usually try to aim. So like, I'm producing a annual calendar every year. We're doing a Kickstarter for that. So I'm ramping up for this current one right now. I have a plush ready to go that I've held on for 2 years now that I want to launch. And I've had a project that's been going on for too long. So finally closing that out, bringing in the next one. So it's very much a project management method, and crowdfunding is a step in that. The first one was a pain in the ass. I asked for probably too much money, and I barely funded. I asked for $15K, and this was 5 years ago, as a relatively unknown creator in a very new ecosystem, and I barely funded. And from there, that was a lot of hard work, learning all the new things about Kickstarter, and then learning how shipping works and shipping calculations, the joys. But I've turned myself to be more towards business than I am towards. As much as I love the creative work, I feel like I am far more efficient on the business side, where people tend to avoid. So that's where I usually try to put most of my effort.
Do you think that there's something, in your life outside of content creation for tabletop games and Kickstarter and stuff that prepared you for the dive into that? Because learning all of this on the fly, like making it all in that initial one, now you're a pro, so you probably just got it muscle memory, but like going into it like that, was there something that you felt like kind of like geared you for it?
I mean, so my prior life was being an analyst. So collecting data, analyzing data, seeing trends, understanding why the data looks like the way it is, understanding business processes, and trying to find solutions or optimize, stuff like that. So, I mean, it really comes down to just being curious and willing to learn. If you are curious, if you are willing to learn something, or like willing to try again until it's right, then I think you'll be fine, because you really need to, put energy towards it. And it's a lot of energy. Like, you're going to build a Kickstarter page and it's going to look okay. It's going to look all right, but you need to make a Kickstarter video. You're probably going to spend a week making that Kickstarter video. Probably 4 days of that week are going to be editing.
Mm.
So there's a lot of like trial, error, rinse, repeat in that regards, because like I've made a couple of Kickstarter videos. They all take a lot of time. I can spend an entire day making a Kickstarter video. And that's like an entire like 7 a.m. to like 8 p.m. And I probably will take an extra day to do it, another to like, clean it up even more, or like to change which music I want to make. And that means I have to retime everything. And like you learn the tool as you go. Like I wasn't that familiar with Premiere. I wasn't familiar with Photoshop that much. I wasn't familiar with InDesign until my curiosity or desire to learn forced me to use those applications, and then you learn with it as you grow.
Yeah, so there's a lot that we want to get into, but the Kickstarter thing is definitely, I think, one of the key features that I would like to talk about, but also understanding that this could be a whole podcast in itself. Maybe for now, the last thing that I'll just kind of leave as an open-ended question for you is, what are the secrets?
Nowadays, it's advertise early, advertise often.
Okay.
The thing is that you are going to be a nuisance to people, and it's sort of accepted that, like, everyone understands that you're going to be the asshole trying to shill your thing. But the thing is that you can't be that asshole. You can be an asshole, but you can't be that asshole.
Where is the line for you? Like, what draws the distinction?
So for me, like, I'll try to maybe do a post or two a day. I don't like intruding in people's feeds unless it's like I promote your stuff here, but I'm not looking for those. So if I find them, I will, maybe post a thing in there. But I don't usually go to message boards. I don't go to blogs or not blog. I usually don't go to like forums. I mean, because like EN World or like other large places, because they usually have pretty stringent requirements on advertising or like shilling. Right. And they don't want everyone else, like Reddit even, they don't want people to shill. They want you to participate in the community. Right. I don't have time to participate on Reddit because I don't really like Reddit. And so so I posted a Kickstarter project to Reddit, and they're like, "Oh, how is this person leaving with 10K in their pocket?" And I'm like, "How the hell am I making 10K? Like, show me where I'm making that money, because I want to know."
That is a fantastic margin.
I know, right?
We need this person to tell us how they did that math.
Yeah,
I know. Yeah. It's like, am I making paperbacks with like no art?
So, just as a rough estimate, what do you expect? Like, what percentage of the Kickstarter, as a rule of thumb, that you see somebody putting up their product for, are they actually taking home in their pocket?
1 to 5%, maybe.
I would say at most 5.
And then
for me, I typically don't even pay. I pay myself on a monthly basis from mostly the sales of my products. Only recently have I actually started to pay myself for my Kickstarter, because I usually don't budget myself because I am not writing, I am not editing. I only do layout and write prompts. So I am a project manager at its finest, or the ideas guy. So I'm pretty much managing and doing layout. I should probably pay myself for layout. I'm getting into that soon. But most of my projects, 100% is going to product and production.
So we'll come back to, like the where you promote and how you promote and all that kind of stuff later on. But a question for both of you, mentioned that, one thing that I did want to mention is that I'm probably like worth noting on that point that you just recently made, that the Kickstarter is not necessarily the way that you make money with a product, right? It gets
the Kickstarter makes the product.
Thank you. Yeah, and then the money that you make afterwards is up to you to market and dish out in all of the ways that would do those things.
And this can really depend on your budget, or like, what are you budgeting for? What type of quality are you looking to make? If you're looking to make like a professional looking product, you're making the product with the money. If you're making like a zine or something like that, or have like lower costs, you can probably definitely make some profit off of it. But most of the idea is Kickstarter, you're mass producing a thing. Like, you're looking to produce 200 books. or you're looking to produce 500 books. You're going to make your sales in the sale of the remaining 800 books that you order out of that 200 you need to fulfill.
So that being said,
At least from my business standpoint.
Sure. And now that you mention it, JB, did you mention that you've done Kickstarters before as well, or?
I have never done a Kickstarter, but I have been involved in Kickstarters. I've written, edited, layout, all that good stuff for Kickstarters, and been in the fold.
So I don't want to leave you out of that conversation either. Would there be anything that you wanted to add to that?
Really, the only thing that I can say is that people who look at tabletop Kickstarters specifically, and they're like, they have all this money left over. He's asking $15,000 to make this tabletop book. Good Lord.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the cover is $300.
Right.
Interior art, $75 a piece, up to $300 for a full page. Like, the prices come with the quality, just like Andreas was saying. If you're making a zine and it's just going to be text and it's just going to be white paper and you're just going to get it mailed, it can only cost like $500 to give it to 100 people. You know, it's all depending on like bulk ordering and things.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're talking about 1,000, 1,500 books, it's storage for the physical books when they come in. It's shipping costs and packaging costs. It's the writers and the editors. I've had to come onto a Kickstarter before that needed saving 2 months before it was supposed to go live. The person that was doing the layout didn't do any of it and said that they weren't going to, and they needed me, and then I found a bunch of editing problems, and then I had to be editor, writer, layout artist, photo manipulator, so that came with a premium. And I can see Andreas's face. He knows that came with a premium for my service to help the Kickstarter complete.
Yeah.
And that's something that the Kickstarter has to take into account before it sets its goal or before it goes live. So there's always going to be a margin over what you need, but that's emergency funds. That's stuff that you need to have in case one of these problems arises.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So thank you for pointing that out, that because it's something that I've sort of like heard echoes of, like, oh my God, they made so much money from this Kickstarter, and it's like, well, I don't know, to a certain extent, not to go off on a rant, but that's true, I think, with business in general, like, oh, it costs how much? What? Like, what is, like, people don't have like a good frame of reference for go ahead.
One easy thing is like production run of like the Baby Bestiary book. It's 100 pages, hardcover, 8.5 by 11, costs around $5,000 for 1,000 books.
Mm-hmm.
And then for Baby Bestiary, every image in there was $500 full page. So there was 24 beasts in that. That's around $32,000, or what is it, $2,500 at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then cover, that's another $800. And then we haven't even talked about editor and writing. So then we're already up into tens of thousands, and I haven't even like looked at paying myself yet.
Yeah, basically a Kickstarter is a really fast a startup. Yeah, it's an investment campaign.
It's a pre-order infusion.
Right.
The hard part for people to visualize, and anyone who's not sure about how like a Kickstarter for a book works at this point, just visualize that a novelist might run a Kickstarter for their next novel, right? And people are like, but you're going to make money off of selling the novel. Mm-hmm. You're not paying the person to write the novel. You're paying their rent and their utilities for the 5 months that they spend writing it. You're paying the editor, and you're paying the publisher, and you're paying to get the physical book. Okay?
Yeah.
So it's all of the things that you're not actually ingesting from the book that you need to pay for that the writer himself can't do. And that's why tabletop books are so complex in that regard, is because you have to have this perfect fusion of art, editing, writing, production, delivery. All these things need to come together to make one product every single time.
So one thing that's come up is with Kickstarter. It used to be just the idea would get funded, and now it's almost to the point where you have to have the product finished in order to get funded. Is that the same thing for your industry as well, or is that more like other areas that have that Kickstarter problem?
You'll go ahead, drop or.
I was just going to say that the tabletop industry specifically has had a large boom, as Andreas has said, from Critical Role, from celebrity backing. Hasbro is actually in control of Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons and Dragons by extension, and Hasbro has basically infinite money. So anytime they want to bring attention to a product, they can. But it never looks like it takes that much effort. But for people making those books and those products, it is a Herculean effort to have everything done and ready to show. And before people back Kickstarters for tabletop RPGs and tabletop publications, they want to see almost everything. They want to see the art, they want to see the cover, they want to see teasers, they want to see stretch goals, they want to see how all of the pages are manufactured, what information is going to be inside. Where 5 or 6 years ago, I'm sure that Andreas can tell you, the Kickstarter used to be, I want to make a Dark Souls ripoff. And people would be like, that's cool, I'll give you $1,000. And then you write it, and then you make some money, and then you publish it.
Yeah,
and now they want to see a finished, polished product before they even bother backing something.
I feel like this came up mostly in the board game space, where a lot of people got burned, and so now they want to see They want to see the board game reviews before it even kickstarts. And so that sort of demand on quality has also carried into other parts of the Kickstarterverse. And I still fight with this as much as possible because I like to sell the idea of the product. Like I want to make this and this. But nowadays there is a requirement that, like, I used to, do sample layouts and stuff like that as well. But nowadays you need a playtest. Like if you're doing a mechanics, you need something to show because no one's going to believe that you're pulling off what you're doing unless you've shown you did the work. And that from a budget standpoint is like, well, great. Now I need to invest money I don't have into something into a product I might make, depending on how well it does. And there's a huge gap in terms of like, what the startup idea of Kickstarter was. And I still like that. And I have to fight against the, people who now expect that a completed product. And then my most recent Kickstarters actually, like for Drifter, went up against that because people wanted to see the final playtest already. And it's like, no, I'm making it right now. And I'm a good designer, believe me. But, people want to see the finished product already. And that's sort of, go ahead.
I was going to say, does it make sense to make smaller scope products instead of a large conglomerate of products? So
if you do the presentation right, both are. So yes, smaller scope, most minimum viable product is the best way to do it. Kickstarter has a weird trend in tiny fulfillment goals. So a lot of projects that go really big are only asking for $10,000, which is like, are you kidding me? The production budget on this is at least 30. But they do it so they snowball. And then if they don't snowball, they cancel and relaunch.
Because
it's a very startup-y
advertising that you passed your goal in 24 hours gets more attention than having a fantastic product. I see it all the time, and it drives me nuts.
Can I swear on this channel?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I fucking hate it. I honestly fucking hate it. Because it's an illusion. It's false advertising.
I think it's in a sense, yeah, it's predatory in a sense. You're almost kind of like appealing to some of the baser instincts of humanity when you do that.
It's marketing. Yep.
Yeah.
It's not what you need. It's what they need to see.
Yeah. So there's a personal note in here that I would make, not just for myself though, but on behalf of almost every professional artist that I know, who has even kind of touched this area. I think it's worth noting this idea of, the Kickstarter being a fundraising effort for the product, not a money-making scheme. So if you are listening to this in the future and you're somebody that is planning a Kickstarter and you're going to try and hire artists based on the amount of money that you hopefully will make on a Kickstarter, stop. Don't do that. You're not going to pay the artist. You're basically just asking for free work, and it's not feasible. Now you know better, so you're just being rude if you continue to do that afterwards. Okay,
there would be like so if someone's asking for you to make art for someone's Kickstarter project, as a contractor or someone who writes contracts, I would have a condition that says after X duration, if the Kickstarter doesn't get launched or funded, you owe money. As a guarantee that you will get paid, whether it is from Kickstarter royalties, from the Kickstarter itself, from payment for like past work, or if X duration passes and payment hasn't been rendered, owe payment.
That's fair. Can get a little sticky though, because like, you know, anybody that hasn't been paid or is still waiting to get paid on a contract knows that that's like that can be like pursuing that could be a huge pain. So.
And only do that with people you've worked with before.
Okay, yeah. That's that makes it viable totally. So, having talked a little bit about you guys, you know, having generated income from products that you have made, Kickstarter or not, just as a topic in itself, you guys are welcome to be as specific or as vague as you want to be. What kind of living would a supplement creator for tabletop games expect to make? What sort of income is feasible, and is it something to do as a main source of revenue, or does it need to be supplemented with is it part of a diverse revenue stream?
Depends on where you live.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean?
I live in California.
Okay.
And where I live, I need at least 65 to 70K a year to live. I do not quite earn that yet on my tabletop products. I need to at least double my revenue flow to hit that. And so right now, tabletop is currently my supplemental. And that's purely because of where I'm living and how I am living. If I lived elsewhere, this could be a different story, but California is my home and it's on fire.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not laughing at that.
I know.
It's just,
I know.
Laughing is oftentimes a means of relieving nervous energy, and you have to laugh or break down into sobs. And so I'm sorry for that. That is a shitty situation to be in.
No.
Yeah.
As much as I would love to do full time, I have tried it, and the problem is standard of living that we're looking at, or the cities that we want to live, it's just too expensive. Especially if we want to live like we just bought a house. So there's and I live in Los Angeles currently. So right now, like I have to work another job somewhere. Whether it's, I would love to get in the games industry and like apply the knowledge that I've got and the skills I have for my current job, for my publishing into something. Like I've been making stabs at trying to get in the Riot Games or other game studios in the area. I'm still working on that.
So is that a long-term goal for you, is to make that type of transition?
I mean, 3 years is a long-term goal. Like, it's actually a short-term goal right now. That's where I'm currently pushing for now.
Okay.
But even then, I would still be doing my publishing stuff probably on the side, or diminished to some degree.
Okay.
But from a standard of living side, people have definitely lived their life on tabletop RPGs. It's a matter of, exactly. We have a great example. But it's a matter of your products, how much you want, like there's a level of investment into them and seriousness into getting into the industry and making a profit from it and how you structure it. And it can be done. And I'll let JB talk more about that.
Yeah, JB, please.
So I used to live in Mississippi, and Mississippi has not gotten the reputation as being the poorest state in the United States without deserving it. My cost of living is going to melt some of your faces off, so be prepared, Andreas.
Oh, no.
But my cost of living when I lived in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, was $500 a month.
Holy shit!
That's the apartment, the power, the internet, the food, the gas, everything was about $550-ish a month.
And you could definitely do that with what I would earn from my company paying myself. I could definitely do that.
And I'm sorry, you said you don't live in Mississippi anymore?
I did move.
Okay.
Because as well as being very poor, it's also exceedingly racist, and I did not want to live there.
Yes, that's a rough trade-off, man.
Currently, I live in Las Vegas, and Las Vegas is actually somewhere in the middle ground between living somewhere like Indiana, for instance, and somewhere like California. It's a hub where I can fly out and go to all these conventions, and I can meet with people. People can visit fairly cheaply. I have friends here, and it's worked out fairly well. But when I moved to Las Vegas, I was looking for a brick and mortar job at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was living with my best friend and his wife at the time, and as I was looking for these jobs, and the job market's a little saturated in 2018 when I moved here, it wasn't looking great. Yeah, I could get a job at a restaurant somewhere. I could get a job sweeping, that sort of thing. But when you're not known in the area and you haven't moved over your driver's license and you don't have your own place, people are pretty wary. But then I started noticing, I'm making, $500-$600 a month off of Patreon. And then I've got my sales on the DMs Guild. I had never focused on any of that. I just made stuff to help my own home games and publish them. But I was starting to get a bit of a reputation, and people were starting to like the stuff that I was making. So I thought, well, to supplement my income until I find a job, I'll start making more tabletop stuff, and I'll be publishing it for the DMs Guild for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And 2 months later, I was making way more than I had made previously at my restaurant job. And I've worked construction and logging, and I've had 1,000 jobs over my life. But restaurant, I love food. If anyone's ever followed me on Twitter, they realize that.
Right on.
And when I started looking at the income that I was making from tabletop, I started to realize that I could pay my bills and have a little bit left over. So if I could make X number of dollars organically beyond what I was making on tabletop, I could be fine. And so far it's been 2 years, and I've not had to go look for a job yet. I'm still just doing tabletop stuff. Thank you.
Very cool.
And I think a huge part of that, and we touched on it for the Kickstarter, is reputation, right? Because when you're first starting a Kickstarter and you put out the idea, I want $15,000 to make this thing, people are very, very wary because they have been burned. Celebrities in the tabletop sphere have burned people for tens of thousands of dollars. I'm not going to.
I'm sorry, what was that?
But
there's a creator that's done a series of Kickstarters that's burned people. Pencil Dice being one of them. But go ahead.
Also, Orion Abaca, I can never say his last name, but a member of Critical Role even splintered off and started doing things promising, not fulfilling. It's very damaging for the entire community.
Yeah.
But when people realized that this was me, I wanted to make good products, I wanted to make high quality stuff, I wanted to listen to feedback and develop new things that people wanted, people felt more safe buying my products on launch. And then, as I said before we started the podcast, what I like to do is whenever a product of mine reaches 200 sales, I'll go back and remake the whole fucking thing. I'll check every word, I'll re-edit it, I'll do new layout, I'll do new art. Anything that I think does not live up to my standards at the time, I change. And people love it because they feel like their product is evolving over time, and that as my efforts and my abilities increase to make these products, I'm not leaving my old stuff to wallow in pity. I'm actually trying to increase my entire portfolio, not just my newest work, to match what I want for all of my products to be production-wise.
Right.
And growing that reputation is the only way I can see someone living full time doing content creating like this.
Right.
Can I take over for 2 seconds?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
So I totally agree with the reputation. Like for me, my reputation started in the Numenera community when it first dropped from Monte Cook Games. I was part of the creator community there that was making that's where I started to learn to make PDFs, was creating fan PDFs of the system there. And then when I did my Kickstarter, I already had 4 or 5 products under my belt under Numenera. And then I did a Kickstarter, and so I had the reputation of that community, and they definitely helped me push that Kickstarter along. The 2 questions I had for you, JB, was one, would love to hear you talk about growing a Patreon, because that is something that, like, for me, that's like nearly impossible because of the product. So, which leads into my second question. For the scale of your products, what is your production schedule like? Is it something that you can put out in a few days? Because my products tend to take 6 to 8 months to produce and develop.
So it's very variable, I've found. But as for growing a Patreon, a lot of people neglect the community and the humanity in their brand and their products. I don't want people to join my Patreon for the coupons or for the monthly rewards or for early access to my PDFs. It's fantastic if they want to, but I want them to join the Patreon for me and for that connection with me. When a patron asks me a question, I'll get on Zoom with them. Like, we can talk about it. I can help them however I want. And that's something that a single creator can do that, a larger business can't. And capitalizing on that, I think, is a revenue stream a lot of people do not look into enough.
No, that's really cool.
Exactly. If you are working 6 months on a product, you said, and I've done 8 months on one before, Taverns and Tap Rooms, like I said.
Mm-hmm. Congratulations. I didn't know that was yours. That's awesome.
Yes, thank you. The fact that you knew about it and didn't know about me is weird, but
because I don't have it. I haven't purchased it. I see it on Twitter though a lot.
Yeah,
I know, right?
Really blows my mind. But if you're doing an 8-month project and you have $300, let's say, or even $100 coming in on Patreon, if you do have a job and you do have a primary source of income, the entire Patreon, even if it's just a few dollars, can go into that product and not have to be paid by you and not have to be paid by a Kickstarter, right? Mm-hmm. So if I need a $500 cover for a product, I have it because of Patreon. And that's 1 month of my Patreon, like back in 2018 when I started things. I just took my whole Patreon 1 month and I paid for everything I needed on a product. Mm-hmm. And then I wrote it over the course of a couple months and I published it. And now I'm making money off of that product.
So that kind of goes, go ahead, sorry.
You create the revenue streams that add up. And
I have a feeling that Jovi was just about to say, like, that's the investment part of it.
Yeah.
You put that money in and then you let that money grow through the product. Mm-hmm. So Patreon, like, please don't sleep on it. Because if you get 15, 20 people to give you $2, $3, $5, that can make a huge difference over time, especially if you don't micromanage the Patreon. But I've known people that have 1,500 patrons giving them $10 a month. And, that's world changing. That means every dollar that you make, otherwise, your finances and your living expenses are paid for just from the people showing you monthly support.
Yeah.
And I keep telling people that $1 a month on Patreon changes people's lives.
Yeah.
Never, ever underestimate the value of your $1. It is insane.
And that goes back to, sorry, just want real quickly, I want to comment that also ties back into what you were saying about developing the reputation, because there's a lot of variability. A lot of people get hung up on this thing of like, well, what should I do with my Patreon? Like, what kind of things should I offer? What kind of rewards, tiers, etc. And I think this kind of speaks to this idea that it's there's no formula for, what you should be doing with your Patreon. A lot of it is based on who you are and what you're doing, and having done it consistently and long enough that people can kind of like pick up on the effort. And then it almost, not that it doesn't matter, but then it's like you tailor your Patreon to that, so it's almost like Patreon builds itself once you have something in line that people are familiar with, that you can then say, okay, here's the places where you can jump in and help support the whole thing.
So a few of my friends run podcasts like yourselves. Mm-hmm. And I asked them, how's your Patreon doing? Like, well, we haven't made one. We're not sure what we would do. We don't want to record bonus episodes because it's so hard to record primary episodes. Yeah. I do not blame them at all. And no one should. And I'm like, well, what about you as people? Like, what are you putting into Patreon? What are you saying? Are you having everyone make posts for Patreon and just slice of life, like this is what's happening with me? People love that shit. Like, they cannot get enough, myself included. I want to know what the creators I enjoy watching and listening to are doing with their lives, like the personal things that they want me to know. I eat it up and I will pay for it. Mm-hmm. And that's where your Patreon can come in. Uh-huh. So every week I do a post of a magic item for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and the comments and the actual text for the post has almost nothing to do with it. It's me talking about new recipes I'm trying. It's giving an update on if I'm still feeling sick or not. It's about my apartment complex. Involving people in your life is fantastic on Patreon because I think it helps retention. I think it helps people understand who you are as a person, and it grows your personal brand.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, setting that aside just for a moment, I want to come back to the topic of products, and skip down or skip ahead quickly to tie it back in, though, to something. Are there product types that reliably do better than others? Some that may be more or less risky?
Adventures typically aren't. I mean, they're very specific, and they need to have a very specific brand or tone to them to do well. Usually, people look at a product and be, what can I use in this? For D&D specifically, there's a lot of what creature, location, story, or character can I create? And those are usually the big things. And a distinctive art style really helps with that.
Okay.
The populace is a liar. Every single poll I have ever read, people say, I love to buy adventures, and they sell
really?
1/10 as well as everything else.
What?
Emily had sent her answers to this question in advance, and she said the same thing. She said adventures sell poorly, while DM supplements sell very well.
So what's going on there? Like, what?
One of the top-selling products is literally a list of roll tables. I am baffled by it.
Yeah.
I have a product that is, I think, a gold bestseller, meaning it sold over 1,500 copies, that is just 100 greetings for NPCs to tell the party. Because DMs want to know what the hell to do when they have 5, 6, 11 people sitting at this table waiting for them to run a game. Like, you'll pay $5 if you don't have to think up an NPC name, what they look like, what they say. But adventures hold too many hands. They're too cumbersome to utilize in different ways. Yes, you can strip them apart for parts and use them all over the place, but people have 30 years of that with Dungeons & Dragons already. There are publications that go all the way back to the 80s that they can still steal from. They want things tailored to make the DM's life just a micron easier when they're running this game.
Can you just quickly, can you do like a quick outline of what the differences are there? Like, what is an adventure compared to some of this DM supplemental material?
For those of you that don't know specifically, an adventure for Dungeons & Dragons says the party, your group of players, will get together and they will attempt to stop this dragon, for instance. The party is set in this place. It's set in Vasselheim. It is going to stop a dragon. The dragon wants to awaken a dragon god. And then the adventure will take you from point to point throughout that, like an outline that you would see in school for a novel. Point to point, just like a novel, with branching little narratives depending on how the party does and where the party goes. But a DM supplement would say, here is a dragon god. Here are its stats. Here's what it wants. Here's the people that would worship it. Here is the dragon that worships it, you know. So it gives you the pieces without all the interconnective tissue, whereas an adventure has all that interconnected tissue and goes point A, point B, point C. Even the greatest sandboxes in the world go point A, point B, point C.
Right.
Because it's the only way that you can possibly outline it without 40,000 pages.
Okay.
But when you get rid of all that interconnectivity, you don't need 40,000 pages. You need 25 good pages. And every person running the game can just open up to that page and they have this resource, this raw material that they can shape to fit their story. That's the big difference between a DM supplement and an adventure.
Okay.
So I know some of the people that are watching this, either live or recorded, are artists who have been doing their world building for like 5 to 10 years. They have their dream project in mind. What advice would you give to people like that may not know exactly what products to make? Maybe they think they want to make one single giant product, or if you would suggest making smaller products along the way and then release them periodically, or what advice would you give to someone like that?
I would say it depends on the financial status. So, like, obviously, if they're looking to kickstart or looking to create an anthology, there's a lot of great other Kickstarters out there in terms of like artists who've made like a book project that they've been working on for years, or small comics that they're turning into a giant one. Scurry is one of them. It's like a mouse people. It's like a Rats of Nim almost. But essentially, like, they made multiple. They did a one book, and then that was like a good couple hundred pages, and then they did another graphic novel and another graphic novel of like part 1, part 2, part 3, and those were separate projects. It really depends on the organization and what flows nice as a product, but it's something you should definitely think about before you launch anything, or depending on if you've started on it. If you're looking at it, applying it to tabletop, if you have an art project or an art world that you want to bring to tabletop, bring out your setting. It's obviously, if you want to market it towards tabletop people, it's best to, like in this case, if you're looking to bring it to D&D, talk to people in the community who can understand the industry, and figure out the best way to present it. Because a setting book is good and it can be interesting, but the players need to be able to express themselves in that world, become the characters in that world, and do the cool things that your cool illustrated characters can do. And so there's like, the player's guide. The setting book is good because it gives broad info, but like the adventures, the dragon god, we want to be able to kill the dragon god. So I want stats for it. I want stats to kill the cultists. And under those, we can have notes about, they're trying to summon the dragon god. Hey, the dragon god's a couple pages later. Ooh, I can make an adventure out of this. So you don't have to tell the story. And if you do have a story written, it can still be converted into a setting, or even like a small setting. There are things that I've produced that are system agnostic, and then we create supplements later that integrate into the various tabletop game systems that exist. I don't know if that's the most successful way of doing it, but it works a little bit for us. But there are very many ways to go about it. But if you want to just go for the biggest fish, you'd create a D&D supplement for your world and maybe do a setting book, a system companion, or even just one book at that point, depending on how much work you want to put into it or have other people contribute.
So earlier, go ahead. No, you go ahead, JB, because I can save this
off one. Of that. From my reviewer perspective, because I did do that for a substantial portion of my time with tabletop, if I saw a world book with nothing else about it, I would not bite. So there would not be anything there to draw me in or to hook me, even if it looked like a fantastic world book. If there's no surrounding world about it outside of that book, it's not going to interest me very much. But something that's started to happen organically in the world right now for tabletop games specifically is you can look at Swords Fall on Twitter and Kickstarter and everywhere else. Swords Fall began as an idea, and that is the truest sense of Kickstarter when it first started out, is to present these ideas and let people bite themselves. And what they did is they made art, they made short stories, they developed these small little things for people to engage with and build little bit by little bit more and more interest about it. People would see Swords Fall and they would think, wait, what is that, a game? Can I play that? And the game is coming out soonish, because we all know how these products go, right? But the fact that they've gotten so much support and so much buzz up until now without even having a game means that they're doing something right. So if you have a setting and you release a novel about it, like Name of the Wind, the RPG, it's going to do great. People are going to buy it up. People are going to obsess over it. A Harry Potter RPG, you're gonna hit it right out of the park. As long as J.K. Rowling's not actually involved, you're fine. And that is very sad. I know that we laugh about it, but again, nervous energy. I know a lot of people were really, really hurt about that, but we're here with you. So you have to have something that grabs hold of it before you can build a bigger product. So I would really suggest that if people do have that idea for a setting and they have that idea that they want to manipulate and build, make a Patreon, make a Twitter for it, get some art, build things up. Don't go too quickly, because if you just swing away just to do a huge world book, not a lot of people are going to have much to go off of for that.
Yeah.
So try to start small. I think the small releases, like Moose was saying, a few small releases and then a big one will probably be your best bet for that sort of thing.
You're starting to build
smaller content bites.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of artists I see, like, they'll show whip, like, oh, here is this world I'm building based on this, and then they'll show whip art of all the characters. They'll show color art of the characters. They'll, it's just showing off what they're building, and in that, you build interest. And especially if you're an artist, like, that's even better, because the artist communities can be fairly large and supportive when you're showing off, cool stuff.
Yeah.
And you have to be part of that community too. You have to engage with other people's creations and support them as well. Like, you can't just be the solo person. Like, why is nobody liking my stuff? Like, you got to engage with the world there too.
So you guys have both mentioned something about art now, and earlier, Andreas, you sort of mentioned specifically that some kind of I can't remember now exactly how you put it, but an eye-catching art style, or artwork, having good artwork involved somehow is important. So what's the criteria there for you as far as, like, stylistically and quality wise? What are you looking for, and how much of an impact do you think that finding, like, the right art and the good art is to all of this?
Whether finding a good artist is interesting, because art is very subjective, and so what I look for as a creator is sort of evocative, would be the best way I can put it. It makes you think about the piece. My first product was concept art. It was created by a speed paint artist that specialized in concept art and digital painting. And so it was all, I like to single source art for a lot of my projects, because that makes styling easier, because you get the same artist, the same art style throughout the whole thing.
Right.
That's sort of changed a little bit recently, but it's a lot easier to work with one artist on one project, and you can kind of share the vision. And what I look for is a good, like, aesthetic style. So usually if you're looking for a cartoony style, like for what we had in Scavengers, it was a very cartoony, lighthearted, bright colors, style, but then we have like the pixel art of Hyperlight Drifter, and then we have the painted evocative of non-player cards. There's a theme that runs consistent through them in their visual style. And for me, I let the artist run with it. So I usually give them prompts and let them do what they want. And finding the artist that can put out the vision that I think fits the product that I'm making.
Mm-hmm.
So some artists can, if sometimes you see an artist and I want him to make this project because he can do a cool style that I think would bring this out really nicely. Like you have some artists that do really cool black and gold foil work. I think that would make a really awesome project. I don't know what to do with it yet, but I think it would look really beautiful.
All right.
And that thing about making it consistent and like having it go throughout the entire product. And I think if you are an artist, like on one hand, developing a style definitely helps make a uniqueness to what your work is and what you offer. But obviously that one style won't carry you alone because you have to work with other people's styles when you go work in the broader industry.
So for amongst the products that you guys put out, some of the more major products that you guys have put out or been involved in putting out, what is the range of income after expenses, estimations or averages that would be typical to expect from that, and how much time would be typical of putting into any one of those? I know, Andreas, you mentioned 6 to 8 months, and is that most typical of what you're doing, or yeah?
Yeah. So my projects are typically like 100-page, fully illustrated, hardbound books.
Mm-hmm.
Those typically run with the quality that I run for a pretty hefty price tag, mostly because of art quality. So I'm paying artists $300 to $500 per piece, which adds up really quickly. But if you're looking at, but typically profit wise, the point of the Kickstarter is to pay for the production. And so once I have produced all my books, I now have 800, whatever, 500 books. And if they're selling at $25 a piece, after the $4 of production, and then, your shipping and whatever, you're probably looking at $15 of profit per book, which typically get reinvested into your next projects or whatever contingencies or shipping mistakes you made. And then, and it just goes into there and it feeds into the next project that creates a budget for you to prepay your next project. And then the cycle restarts itself.
Mm-hmm.
So the vast majority of my publications are digital, so that I don't have to worry about shipping and production and handling all of that, especially since I live in an apartment and I live in Vegas.
Right.
Notoriously, it's really shitty here to mail things out.
Okay.
But because I do publications that are digital, I can cut the price down by 2/3 sometimes. But that's another trip up with the tabletop industry, is people do expect about 35 pages for like $2, and that is just not going to cut it anymore moving forward. So if you are an up-and-coming tabletop creator or producer, I strongly urge you to increase your prices, because all the work goes into it, the same as a book, other than the shipping and handling the actual physical resources. But usually I can get anywhere between 0 profit and an entire year's worth of living expenses profit. And it's a huge, sweeping, wide margin.
Okay.
That's the trade-off for not doing a Kickstarter or a GoFundMe to make the product myself. I take all of that risk, and I do reap some rewards, and I do sometimes have a limit on my hands that I just have to try and make sell over the course of a year or two.
So how do you guys like to balance content versus price? Do you have, a guide that you do you have rule of thumb that kind of guides your decisions there, or does popularity of content change that equation, or how does that work out for you?
There used to be, I know some people tried to do like a cost per page, and that's a very weird way of doing it. So typically, like if it's 1 to 5 pages, you could probably sell it for $2 to $5. If it's 20 to 30 pages, you should be selling it for $5 and up easily. If it's more than that, then you should be looking at 10 to 20 easily. And then typically things taper off around there. Typically $19.99 is the most people want to pay for PDFs, but that's the whole, like, how many people are going to buy it versus how many am I going to sell. And
I've had people message me about a $2 PDF and say, I would never pay you $1 for digital.
Yeah, try and charge $500 for an illustration.
Yeah, I'm like, don't buy it. It's fine by me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know for Caretaker Warlock, I got some flack from people, and it's like, 20-page PDF, and I'm selling it for $5, and it's like, how much I paid for art on this? Like 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. Like, I need to earn some money back on this, right?
Yeah.
The equation that Andreas was talking about used to be, people would say, I'm not willing to pay more than 10 cents per page, rounded up to the nearest 95 cents.
Wow.
Technical. So 100-page, fully illustrated PDF, front and back cover, proofread, role-played, play-tested, with marketing, people are like $10 or I'm not buying it. That's just how they were. And
yeah, there's like milestones. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I suffered for a few years thinking that was right, because I would go to places like we mentioned previously in the podcast, like Reddit, Facebook. I would ask people's opinions. Don't do any of that. Don't go to Facebook. Don't ask opinions.
Right.
Don't do any of it. Talk to your peers, and that's it.
Yeah.
Because no one's going to value your work the same.
Yeah.
You're going to have people that see 100 NPC greetings and they're like, thank God, I need this so badly. And they're willing to pay $3 for it, which is fair, I believe. It was only 3 pages, NPC greetings, no art, just my layout. It took me 2 days to make $3. It made sense. Yeah. But I've had publications, an Adventure Path, for instance, that tied into a Wizards of the Coast product that I released that was 60 pages, took me 2 months to make, fully illustrated with a cover and maps and everything else. I asked $15 for it, and I think I've sold 50 copies in 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're always going to have these things where people are not willing to pay for something, and then the very next person is willing to pay you $50 for it and not bat an eye. So don't ask the world, ask your peers what their experiences have been. As for actual art, actual artists that do digital media specifically, for tabletop, you should be paid no less than $75 for what you're doing. It sucks. Like, you're going to exclude some people from that. You're going to have some problems. But if a tabletop company asks you for a piece of art and they're not willing to pay you $75 bare minimum, do not talk to them. They're scamming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ridiculously low.
The parallels in a lot of what you just said to, the world of the artist in particular is huge, and I mean, artists take a lot of comfort hearing from other artists, that other people go through the Twitter effect, so to speak, of people telling you that shit's too high, too expensive, your art isn't worth it, blah, blah, blah. So I feel like it's even doubly refreshing to hear from you guys that are in a related yet also distinct industry, and the same thing is happening where people just don't understand. And you can't really be too mad at them. Yes, their delivery could be better in a lot of circumstances, but you can't be too mad because it's just, you don't understand. And I love conversations like this because it's just like however tiny the drop might be, putting this drop out into the internet bucket, so it's just like another piece of information floating around out there that people can hopefully take in and understand. Like, these, no one's getting rich doing this. Like Andreas was saying, like, the amount of money that you are going to make is largely going to be put back into the next project. You love doing it. You love making the content. That's at the base of it. The amount of money that you make from it, it's nice, but you're really just trying to just pay yourself for the fucking time. So
there's also a half-life on all of this for tabletop. Yeah, there's a tabletop boom right now, but there was also one 30 years ago, and then it relatively fell off the face of the world. I think a substantial portion of why tabletop is kind of blowing up right now is video games suck lately. Like back in the 90s, we had video games that fit on a CD that took us 4 weeks to beat and had all this lore and voice acting. And today, you know, people are looking at the digital art and the digital medium of it, and like we've said, you have to pay your artists. If you want it to look good, you have to pay your artists.
Remember back then when they said World of Warcraft was causing problems for D&D games?
Right.
Because people weren't meeting up anymore and they just wanted to go on raids.
Right. But it's this ease of access that makes tabletop great in a way. And a lot of people don't understand why a tabletop game is great until they realize that there are no bumper rails. You can do pretty much anything. So piggybacking off of that with the idea that artists kind of suffer for their work, it is true. If you like tabletop RPGs, if you like digital art, if you like, you know, oil paints, you're going to have to suffer for the short term to make it start working. Because I did have to work slinging pizza for 3 weeks and invest all of that money into a product because I wanted to make something cool. I wanted to make something that looked great and that a publisher would want to pick up.
Right.
And there's always that upfront cost. Yeah.
It also depends on the art that you're producing because, like, if you look at the works of, like, Crystal Soli or
He's fantastic.
there's a whole bunch of artists that, you know, are Wizards artists or Magic the Gathering, previous Magic the Gathering artists. Like, if you're in that echelon of quality, like ending up on Humblewood kind of stuff, all of those artists are very high rate artists. And you can, if you are of that quality, like, you can definitely, like, easily break out into your own thing if you are establishing that kind of type of fantasy content, which is a very hard type of art to really bring out.
One thing that has worked for me, because I've had some artists that are fairly renowned, like Allie Briggs, for instance, and Nikki Dawes.
Friend of the stream, yeah.
I've had some people make stuff for me that I should never have been able to afford. It's really a price over time issue. So if you tell your artist, when I first worked with Allie Briggs, I messaged her when I put the first word on the page for Taverns, Inns, and Tap Rooms. And I said, I want you specifically to do a cover for this PDF. I love your work. I want you to do it. How much will it cost me? She's like, well, when do you need it by? I'm like, whenever you finish it. If you need 6 months, we can do it in 6 months. And she's like, all right, and gave me a much lower price because I gave her this open door. And I told her, take all the time you need. I want this to be something you're proud of. I want this to be great. The second time, I knew she could do it. She was ready, and I could pay her more because my first one took off. So Taverns, Inns, and Tap Rooms in Hell, she did the art for that cover. And it was just as good and just as mind-blowing, but she knew that I loved her work, that I would be there to support her with any feedback, that I would not be a problem client, and that I had already paid her. Already paying your artist once makes them very susceptible to work for you again. Like,
Amen
it's all about the humanity of it. The humanity of all of this stuff makes such a huge difference.
Yeah. And I've done collaborations with artists as well, where, like, Sarah Dollinger, for example, great fantasy artist or great creature artist, she posted something on Facebook and we ended up building a book together. She had a bunch of creature anatomies and creature variants, and we ended up making Atlas Animalia together. And so, like, you know, an art piece can turn into a product on its own, or art pieces that you think is a concept. Whether, I mean, I don't know if me randomly emailing you saying, hey, do you want to make this a book? Is because you're probably going to get emails from a couple people that tell you that. And so when you're dealing with people who reach out to you to say, like, hey, do you want to make this a product? You definitely do have to look out for yourself and what you're getting back from it. And so like for Sarah Dollinger, that project ended up being like 100 pieces of art for her. And so we hired her to create the book. She's a co-creator of the book. She still has the rights to use the art as she sees fit, and then we just retain it for publishing use. And then she gets royalties on prints.
Cool. Sarah's also going to be on the podcast in a couple of weeks, so that's cool.
Oh, nice.
Just to interject, what you can expect to pay an artist of this caliber is anywhere from $500 to $5,000 for the cover, and then interior illustrations, $300 to $1,000 is not unheard of for the amount of time they're going to be spending on these things. So you're going to be paying for the quality if you're going to be targeting this level of artist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And then also like if you are looking to be budget per se, like I guess like, you know, some artists, you know, if they have a quick style, if they want to, you know, do speed paints. I used my first pieces that I hired people for was from the speed paint group on Facebook, the daily speed paint group. And that was, you know, 3 prompts in 20 minutes to make something. And so I approached those people to do pieces because like, oh, you know, like how long, you know, this takes you only a half hour to make. And you know, that's like today, that's kind of a bad thing because, you know, I should pay for their experience, not for their time. But those people were, you know, students in architecture school. They weren't looking to earn money as an artist, but they took the job or those jobs because, you know, hey, cool, I'm earning something from this. And at the time for me, it felt, you know, it was okay because I'm paying someone for work that they thought was cool and interesting.
Okay.
When I hired Aaron Eric for the non-player cards, which was 400 pieces of speed paint art, we paid him on a monthly basis.
Oh wow!
And
That's cool.
think I hired him for 6 months of full-time pay, and he was able to pay his way out of mandatory military service in Istanbul in Turkey, and then he got married that year too. So it was like, holy shit! Like,
I would love to get to the point where I could have an artist on retainer. Ugh.
I know.
Oh, that'd be so great.
Yeah.
I'll
so
pay you $1,000 a month.
So artists listening, take heart. There are good people in this game that do want to pay you what you are worth. It's not all a bunch of
and a lot of people will ask
there.
for your rates too. So like, be sure your rates are what you want them to be,
and be firm about them too.
Or reevaluate them too. Because like for me, I don't feel comfortable saying we can pay. I mean, only recently I've felt comfortable to say like, oh, we're going to pay $500 a piece for people that I reach out to and interact with. But I'm going to evaluate their portfolios then, and it's a lot more of a formal process. But if I reach out to a specific artist I want to work with, I want to know what their rates are for their piece, because I don't feel comfortable saying like, you know, oh, I want to make an entire book out of their work. I don't know how much it's going to cost them, or like them time wise or work wise.
So conversely, I'm usually like, I like your work. How much? And then if I can afford it, if I can afford it, we move forward. If I can't, I say, I love your work. I'm sorry, I can't afford it. I'll come back if I can.
Yeah, and sometimes people work in the middle, you know, like what if I just need you for 10 pieces, maybe not 50 or something like that, if we can do a discount or whatever, like if you want to be flexible, but be firm on your own bottom line.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to, and as far as being firm about it, like, you know, be confident in the fact that your work has value, because like I said, people do understand. Look for them, like rather than trying to race yourself to the bottom, look for the people that are going to appreciate your work. Shifting back around a little bit, when you guys are getting ready to promo something, JB, I know you said that you're in the habit of waiting until afterwards, but regardless of the timing, though I would like to know a little bit about that as well. What are the types of places that you guys do go to? I know one of you mentioned staying off of Reddit. What does it look like for you guys to start doing the marketing and the advertising and generating the hype train?
You can directly see the difference in approaches almost just kind of based off of how I present myself on Twitter. Is that I like people who know me to see the product I'm putting out. That means that I need to know some bigger people in the world and have them help share things around. but I'm not trying to reach very broadly. I want people who are already interested in what I do to pick up my thing and see it and like it and enjoy it and give me feedback. So I tend to target the audiences that I have on Discord, Twitter, Patreon, another one where people who hate Twitter are going to go to Patreon and see those emails. Don't ignore it. I always go to places where I already have a good, strong foundation of people interested in my work, and I just hammer it over and over again. Because the thing about Twitter and Facebook specifically, I have close personal friends who have done streams and made products in the past 2 weeks I did not see on Twitter or Facebook. You cannot retweet too much. The algorithms are not going to let you oversaturate that market. It's going to make people stop seeing it. It's going to make people look at other things. Use those algorithms to your advantage. I retweet most of the products that I release about 15 times a day for the first 2 weeks that they're out. I don't do anything else, and those tweets keep generating for a few months afterwards.
When you say you retweet them, you're not
Link retweet.
Yeah,
I refresh any posts. I make new posts. I interact with the posts that I've already made, because those algorithms, what they're going to do, specifically Twitter, it's where I've kind of figured things out the most. The algorithms, anytime you interact with the post, a new comment, a new like, a new retweet from yourself, it's going to show it to new people, not the same people over again, right? So if I post something at 10 a.m. PST, just in time for lunch on the East Coast, and just in time for people waking up elsewhere in the world, and I retweet it every couple hours or 2 or 3 times at the high point for Twitter traffic, there are still people that I know personally who never see it, even if they interact with my other posts, just because of how the algorithm works.
Right.
So you can't oversaturate those personal, small social media markets. Retweet, repost, like, share, do it over and over and over and over again.
So what you're saying is that when you do that, when you retweet or repost, or quote tweet or whatever, you're not running the risk of bombarding people that have already seen it 3 times with like a 4th time, or it's not.
You're really not. The chances of them seeing it more than 2 or 3 times, unless they only follow 8 people, which they're not going to really care,
right.
The chances of them seeing it more than 2 or 3 times are infinitesimally small.
That's really interesting to know about Twitter. Yeah. Okay.
I have never had anyone complain about seeing something that I posted too often.
Okay.
And even if they do, worst case scenario is that person unfollows or they mute you, for instance. They can also mute the thread, but I know a lot of people like to drive in nails with a forklift. We all know how people act.
Yeah.
So, you may ostracize 1 or 2 people if they see it and just have a bad day and overreact. But if you reach 10 new people by doing it, you're still at a net positive. And people that know you know that you're excited for this thing that you did. You spent 6 months writing about taverns, even though you don't drink or go out, So people tend to reveal the humanity in that nature too. They're like, he's excited about this, it'll pass. And then that'll be it.
So Twitter is kind of like your main jam. I mean, do you do anything on Facebook or Instagram, or like are you move in any like Discord communities? Or
I do grow a Discord community, and I did do a lot with Facebook and Facebook groups, but due to security risks and overlap with communities that I do not want to be anywhere near my community, I did take a huge step back on Facebook. I update it when a new product launches or when I do something interesting, and that's basically it. So people that are friends and family that want to keep an easy way to check on me can use Facebook, and I do have a lot of followers there too. But I've passed 10,000 followers on Twitter just because constantly doing little giveaways and interacting with them and building this community, being very vocal about getting rid of bigotry in the community has been something that I've done since I started on Twitter because of my experiences with Reddit and Discord. And I would love to do Instagram, but I forget it exists. I really need to work on that.
Bold statement.
Yeah, it's sometimes hard to keep track of all of it, and since Instagram is primarily aimed towards the phone and mobile markets, I don't really. I mean, I keep my phone on my desk all day, but it's not something that I keep actively on. I do need to get better about that because I know a lot of artists have had a lot of success with their digital works there. It is sometimes hard to translate PDFs and tabletop documents into that way, but you can always share out your artist's work. And I do need to start doing that, tagging those artists and building that community too.
The one thing I'm going to add is Emily's response. The first thing she mentioned was Discord. And you can find Dungeons and Dragons related Discords out there. Have either of you guys reached out to those other big servers that were created by other people for their own communities to see if they'll latch onto your products, or does that not work so well?
Interesting, because it depends on how much of it's like the forums. Like, it depends on how much of an active member you are of those communities. Some places will have a shameless plug section, which then you can obviously post your stuff there and see if people notice it, depending on how active the Discord is. Typically, I mean, it can be a hit or miss depending on your depending on your tracking. But like sometimes you'll get a few people from bigger ones, depending on which ones you interact with.
Don Lee mentioned in the chat for JB a question: is that Twitter strategy effective no matter what your Twitter following size?
I was just typing out a reply, but I'd love to actually say it.
Yeah.
So I do believe so. And here's the big thing, right? I don't just tweet about the things I want to sell people. That is such a bad move. It's a bad move on any platform.
Yeah. If
you do email chains or subscriber lists for email, don't also just message them when you have something you want to sell. It's scummy and people don't like it. Right. People don't engage with it, and I think the drop-off is somewhere in 35% overall engagements if all you talk about is what you're making to sell. So if you have a good presence, and if you're tweeting about your food, if you're tweeting about this thing that excites you, this new movie, this new book, these things that you're taking inspiration from, your family, your personal life, and you're giving them several opportunities to engage with something you're selling or you're creating, people tend to interact pretty well with it. I saw an uptick about 15% when I was real small, like under 100 followers. And as people started to learn more about me, they became more invested in the success of my products, and they would share. Yeah. JB's a very nice person. He was very good to me on this project. He paid me more than I asked to for this art piece. You know, he's a great editor. Check out what he did. And that's kind of all that it's about. If you have a small following, don't bombard them constantly with just the things you're selling. Be sure to inject some of you into what you're doing.
We were talking about this a bit last week, actually, with the focus was on Twitch and building community on that platform, and how the core community there is going to be willing to support you elsewhere. So, I was going to ask, is there a tabletop RPG community on Twitch?
Yeah.
Yes, there is.
It's not as big as any video game usually. There's some video games that only have like 800 people watching, but overall, the big mainstream video games are going to get more interaction because tabletop is usually very long form, 2 to 4 hours in general. But I have been a part of 5 charity streams this year and raised like over $50,000 all 5 together. We never went under 10K. So there's plenty of money out there and plenty of people that want to watch the magic happen.
Yeah.
And people that are just interested.
There are larger streams.
I meant to ask, specifically for the creators. Is there a creator community out there rather than just I know there's people that play Dungeons and Dragons on stream, but is there, let's make a world type thing?
Very small.
Not
very
really.
Small. I'd say 10%.
Yeah, and that's because, they're trying to make it into a product or don't want to share too much, or it's not pretty. It's not easy to share what your world is like as you're still forming it out. It's like designing mechanics on stream. It's boring because I spent 45 minutes trying to figure out the right word, for a mechanic.
I know that Joby's going to latch onto this, but there's a point when you're looking at physical digital art where a shape turns into a thing. And it's like this magical kind of experience that it almost makes the artist and the people watching excited when they see the blob turn into a person, right? You don't get that when you're writing and designing for a tabletop thing. It's like, what if I had it do 2d6? No, 2d6 is too high. And then you're scrolling through PDFs and flipping through books until you find some form of this rule from way back when. And you're like, oh, okay, 1d8. No one gives a shit about any of that. And it's terrible to watch. There is a small subset of DM Workshop that I think is very popular for podcast and live stream because people have questions need answering, and people are curious about it.
Well, since you brought up this topic of writing, and it leads into a question that we were thinking of is that relates to the development process. And do you guys get blocked? Are in the course of the creative process? I'm sure you do. Writer's block is a thing. What does that look like for you guys? And what are the kinds of things that you guys work on when you're dealing with artist block on a particular project? And also, what are some things that you do to sort of like break out of that?
For me, when I'm working on a project where I have like a writer's block or even just a creative rut, what I'll typically do is I'll just work on something else completely. Like I'll work on a different aspect of the project, a different chapter. I'll have a like stand-in layout, that I'll be like, okay, here's what it is for now. I need to figure it out later. This will do for now. And I can, do the more complicated thing later. If I can't figure it out now, and just, use the stand-in, as the permanent solution until I can figure out a better answer for the stand-in.
There is a short form answer to this that I think bridges a lot of gaps between your listeners and your viewers and us as tabletop creators. Everything you suffer making digital or physical art pieces, we suffer too. So sometimes, God damn it, I just can't put a word on the page, and I'll lay on the floor and lament for 10 minutes. Like it's a huge part of it. And the same kind of strategies that have worked for my friends who do visual media, particularly painting and digital painting, because it's so finicky sometimes and it takes so much of your effort. All of the things that work for them generally work for me. Taking a break and watching something you enjoy, something to spark a little bit more creativity in you, getting away from the PC and going outside. Those little things where you kind of forget that you're a living, breathing human being and you think that you're a production machine. All of that, it sets into everybody. Editing, writing, layout, publishing, marketing, social media managing. It all comes back together. I love that you said artist block instead of writer's block, because damn if that's not true.
Fair enough. Well, I think that we would be coming up. I don't want to take too much more of your guys' time. We said about an hour to 2 hours, and well, we're coming up on that. And I don't want to make a hard cutoff, so I would like to kind of leave some of the last words to you guys, unless Moose has anything that you want to jump in with before we turn it over to you guys for the last word.
Real quick, where would you guys find an editor to help edit your books? And how would you price like their time?
Oh yeah, good question.
So pricing is an awful lot like setting your own rates for doing digital work. At one point, I was editing for 1 cent a word, and now I'm up to like 12, because reputation. A whole lot of this stems on reputation. Your reputation as a professional and what you can physically and mentally do, the gymnastics that you can do to make a product better, that's going to increase your rates. You can't ever really start too low. Only you know the value of your work, right? But when people are willing to pay it, go up. And when people are willing to pay it again, go up. If you're looking specifically to find editors, talk with other people in the community, talk to your peers. It's always going to be your best resource. They have their favorites, they know their prices, they know what they're capable of, and they're not afraid to share. You can also find Discord communities if you're an editor out there looking for work, potentially. My favorite has been the DM's Guild Creative Lounge on Discord. The DM's Guild Creative Lounge has a lot of people looking for quick, short, easy to do projects. Sometimes those projects snowball into over 100,000 words that I've been editing for 5 weeks now, but things happen.
It was quick. No.
Yeah. Yeah, so always hire an editor, always hire a sensitivity reader. You absolutely 100% need them. If you think you're going to push your product out and make up for it later, you are lying to yourself and you are hurting yourself. Hire an editor, hire a sensitivity reader, hire them today when you start working on it.
Yeah, same thing. If you're looking for an editor, get recommendations from people. Typically, you'll get a lot of people from word of mouth, or if you enjoy working with someone, you'll find another editor that they can recommend. You'll find people that way. That's how I found my editors, was through recommendations mostly. And I still work with them today. Pricing wise, one editor I work with actually is hourly now. And that's because he does it professionally as well. But he goes through an hourly system. He prints it out, marks it up, and then goes in the digital and does it that way. And that's just his process. But
because we mentioned DM's Guild, it would be remiss of me not to mention the copyright and IP issue. Some creators refuse to publish on DM's Guild because of this, but I'm not sure what the pros and cons are of why you would want to post there anyway, and what reasons you would have to not post on there.
The reason,
go ahead.
Yeah, it's very complicated. Hopefully I can sum it up quickly. The reason that you would not publish on there is you do not want to share 50% of what you make. That is your number one and only reason to not publish on DM's Guild. Okay? If you're doing something for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, you should probably do it on DM's Guild. It does cost you half. No joke, no qualms. 50% is gone, and then you split the rest of the 50 up among whoever's involved in the project for royalties. The reason you do want to publish on the DM's Guild is because a product that might get 50 or 100 eyes will get several 100,000 eyes on it on the DM's Guild. First day at launch.
Selling on Amazon, there is a little bit of a marketing machine behind it. That will definitely push the visibility a lot more. Obviously, your product has to be, of quality or be able to get noticed as something like, visually striking or interesting concept.
You get the eyes on it immediately.
And for me, I don't sell on DM's Guild because I have an established audience outside of pure D&D, and I want to sell my things on my website and create print products to sell at conventions and stuff, which I can't do if I sell on DM's Guild.
Right. If you outside,
if I want to sell a book,
marketing machine.
Yep, I can't. So as a member of DM, or if your product is in DM's Guild, you cannot buy copies to sell at a convention at a rate that would be financially reasonable.
That was going to be, or related to my next question, is that if you have stuff on DM's Guild, are you not able to have that anywhere else for sale?
Nope.
Okay.
Nowhere else. If it's on DM's Guild, it is only DM's Guild.
Okay. Now, does that also...
So you're sort of marrying... Oh, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, does that also mean that the content that you put into your product can be whatever... Like, you can use whatever IP from Wizards and or Dungeons and Dragons that you want without having to worry about any copyright or trademark or anything like that?
Pretty much. There's a little bit of limitations on which specific setting you can use. But for the most part, anything in D&D is free to play in terms of the setting.
Okay.
There is a pretty big wrinkle a lot of people don't know about. Again, one of the reasons that you would publish the DM's Guild is that you know that you can have access to 35 years of back catalog lore, characters, established IPs already, Dritstord and things like that. People, like names and places people know, and you can use them in your product, which is insane. So that 30% or that 20% is Wizards' cut of the 50 that they take. The rest is hosting for DriveThruRPG. That 30% goes to keeping the servers and advertising and bundles and all this back-end shit that you don't want to do yourself unless you already have an established IP. The wrinkle is that you cannot make something up in the Forgotten Realms. You can't say, oh, there's a long-lost city of ancient elves near Waterdeep. There wasn't. Okay. And you cannot do that. They will take your money and cut it off the guild, right? So that's just part of it. You have to be very respectful, and you should really, if you get into using the DM's Guild, read the incredibly robust IP thing that they show their new creatives.
So Lawrence made a related...
Would it be worth a new creator publishing something that they don't care about too much, but they want to make well, publish it on DM's Guild to get recognition before they branch out on their own?
Yes.
Reasonable strategy.
Okay, so Lawrence in the chat I want to address really quick because he mentioned RPG drive-thru. What would be the pros and cons between those two? Obviously, there would be some copyright and trademark issues going through RPG drive-thru. So what would you weigh the advantages or disadvantages there between those two?
So technically selling anything outside of DriveThruRPG, if you're making 5th edition material, it's through the OGL. And that's just a license on what you can create with the D&D rules and the rule set. You can publish that anywhere, whether it's on DriveThruRPG, whether it's on itch.io, whether it's on your own storefront, wherever. You're unrestricted in what you do with it, but you can't use Driz Duerden or Elmister or any of the characters' Forgotten Realms stuff. You have to create something that maybe references things similar to the world or things that could be placed into that world without being, without being like the Baby Bestiary. That doesn't even have 5th edition rules, so it doesn't even cover OGL. But the fact that the creatures would fit in the world or are from the inspiration, from the art style, is where people, I advertise to D&D because it fits in that fantasy.
Publishing on DriveThruRPG is very, very good if you have a system agnostic thing that you would like to publish. If you have a non-specific Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition thing that you would like to publish. But again,
or a Kickstarter.
You're going to be competing with people looking at other RPGs. You're going to be competing with people looking for specific creators, specific products. So it's a lot narrower margin of eyes that are interested in what you're doing. Whereas on the DM's Guild, every single person there is looking for specifically Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition stuff. Like, that's what they're there for. So your product is going to be titillating as anything else on the table.
Okay.
Yeah, so the most part is if you're doing not DriveThruRPG, not DM's Guild, you're pretty much like going to be kickstarting it or have other plans for that product outside of one ecosystem.
Okay. Cool. Well, at 2 hours, this podcast turns into a pumpkin. So I do want to wrap it up. But real quickly, I want you guys to wrap for a couple minutes. I know some of you are on NDA, so probably what you're working on currently you can't talk about. But if there is a project that's happening right now, whether it's your own or something else that's happening that you're really excited about, JB, why don't you start? What's happening right now that you're really stoked on?
So currently I am, again, working on other people's projects for the entirety of 2020. But going into 2021, I have an entire folder full of things that I'm interested in making and people that I want to involve. There is a creative stifling when you're working just editing words for 100,000 different pages, you know. So the idea of grabbing a project and running with it seems really awesome right now. Currently, I am still working on the Monsters of Merca supplement for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. It essentially is a parody version of the United States of America in 5th edition.
I was wondering if I heard that right, Merca.
Yes, Merca. They have bucks, and it's all run by the Don, and it's got all of that stuff in it. I'm currently doing layout and editing for that product, and they're doing their first expansion in that world called Restaurants and Retail, where it's a bunch of monsters and settings like the great value version of all the things that you would find in America put in the world of 5th edition. It's very funny. It's full of puns that I hate, but, you know, it's fun.
Especially as an editor.
Right. It's one of those things that a lot of people need that catharsis right now in laughing at the trials and the tribulations that we've seen, and having all of these sensitivity readers and having all these people involved. It makes it a very good platform to have some fun set in an America that's been fantasized in such an extreme way to fit in 5th edition.
Very cool. How about you, Andreas?
I'm Andreas Walters. I'm from Metalweave Games, and I am currently working on the Hyperlight Drifter tabletop role-playing game. Hyperlight Drifter is a video game, an indie video game pixel art that was very popular, that was also kickstarted. And it's been a really cool experience bringing that to life in tabletop RPG format. Also, I have a bunch of other stuff coming up because I tend to love giving myself work. I have a Baby Bestiary calendar coming up in 2 weeks. I have Dragon Stew releasing in November, and then we have the Hyperlight Drifter fanzine Pulse releasing in November as well. So that's a few, and then I have Owlbear Plus coming in January. So no shortage of things to do.
Fantastic. Thank you guys so much for the time. It was incredibly rewarding. I'm sure there's a lot of great information that people are going to get out of all of this. And in the future, I would love to have both of you on, maybe individually, because there was probably 20 other questions that we could have gotten into just with each of you respectively. And if you guys were up to it, it'd be cool to do that sometime in the future. But
you should definitely try to get Emily back on here. We severely miss her not being here today.
For sure.
She blows my mind every time I talk to her. So much information outside of the sphere of what I or Andreas do.
Okay, totally. Duly noted. That will definitely happen. All right. Well, I'm going to cap it there. Thank you again, you guys, so much.